Hey there, party people. You're going to be indulging me for a bit because I want to talk about The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. I have been waiting for this movie to come out for 3.5 years. Was it worth the wait? Well, ignore the title for a second and let's get into that. There will be spoilers. So for context, the War of the Rohirrim is set 183 years before Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, which is what the Wikipedia says, but that is incorrect. In actuality, a majority of the events of the film take place 183 years before The Hobbit, which is 77 years before the main events of The Lord of the Rings. Expect me to continue to nerd out like this throughout the video. Now, for it being noted as being set in Peter Jackson's vision of Middle-earth specifically, I find this a pointless distinction to make. Yes, we see familiar settings from the movies in the form of Rohan, the soon-to-be Helm's Deep, and Isengard, along with Miranda Otto reprising her role as Éowyn to be the narrator of the story. But outside of that, outside of the visual fidelity, there is no other point to distinguish this as Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings outside of marketing bullshit. It's just Lord of the Rings. Simple as that. The story itself is taken from Appendix A of The Lord of the Rings, Annals of the Kings and Rulers 2, The House of Ersorrow, which I am terrible at pronouncing. I apologize. But specifically, it covers the part of Helm Hammerhand. Although in this movie he is more of a secondary protagonist, with his daughter Hera being the main protagonist. Now, in the excerpt that details Helm Hammerhand and what goes on in this movie, his daughter is there, but is unnamed, barely being a character, and is just really the catalyst of the inciting incident to the events that the movie covers. And honestly, I do think it is a rather smart choice to choose the daughter to be the focus of the story, especially for one like this, where it is short and bereft of detail in the original source material. This allows for more creative freedom in the project without the need to bastardize and shit on the source material like a certain other project that I will not be mentioning by name. Though, obviously, it can still be disrespectful to the source material or just be plain bad, but in this case, I think they do a very good job, as they mainly just fill in the gaps without removing or greatly changing anything that's already there for the most part. There are some changes, and of course there are some hiccups, namely being Hera's, name. The language and names of the people of Rohan are based on Old English, and language fidelity is incredibly important to Tolkien's works. After all, the man made these stories initially as a vehicle for the languages he created. Hera, as a name, is of Greek origin, and thus doesn't fit linguistically. But I will say that it does fit in terms of alliteration and just kind of the overall vibes. We have Helm, of course, his two sons, Halath and Hama, and then his daughter Hera. Helm, Halath, Hama, Hera. It doesn't sound out of place at all, and is mostly of concern if you are really in tune with etymology. So, while it's not a name Tolkien would have picked, it does feel like a your heart was in the right place sort of choice. Now for Hera, the character herself, I felt she was actually very well done throughout the story. She is strong-willed, and I know that there are going to be people that will point to her and call her woke. But for me to care about that, I would have to respect the opinions of those people. I would say more about those people at this time, but they genuinely mean very little to me. However, they will admittedly make a nice little example throughout this review. Though, I will try not to make any direct references, as I do not wish to give specific individuals the time of day. My day is far more important. Their collective existence is just to be of service to some points that I have. And of course, you don't have to be red-pilled to dislike Hera or the movie in general. All opinions are a case-by-case basis. But for me, based on the readings that I've done with Éowyn, Luthien, Morwen, Galadriel, and Elwing, I feel like the characterization of Hera falls in line with what is in Tolkien's works. You could argue that maybe she's a bit modern, but I don't feel it's enough to really discount her in any meaningful way. She is a girl that takes after her father in a lot of ways. She is labeled as wild, but is incredibly resourceful and ultimately is not a disrespectful person. She wants her own choices to matter. She wants to prove herself to her father, be by his side in battle. But also, she isn't trying to undermine him, nor is she shown to be utterly perfect. She's not a character that can do it all by herself. She is clearly in a place where she is still trying to figure herself out, has a solid idea, a basis, but not a complete image. Could she stand to face a few more consequences? Yeah, I suppose you could argue that if you wanted to, but the same could be said for the likes of Aragorn or Legolas. So, I'm of the mind that the consequences that she does have within the narrative are perfectly serviceable. Honestly, the most plot-armored character is the old shield maiden Olwen. There are several moments she should have died or at least have been seriously injured. And she was a side character. It was really weird and I don't really care for that part. And speaking of moments that I don't really care for, there was a moment where Hera lured away a rabid Mumakil, or Oliphant if you prefer. And it was really clever, using the horn that was used to train it, taken from the corpse of its handler. The part that I don't care for is that she led it into a forest where she managed to trick a watcher in the water to attack and eat it. First of all, how the hell did that thing get there? And second of all, how the hell did she know exactly what it was? She just recited a poem about being careful in dark waters? How does that translate to, there is a giant tentacle monster that can totally eat an elephant? That was the most egregious use of fan service in this movie, and was just really, really unneeded. Could have just tricked it into stepping into a river that was too deep for it. But with those parts out of the way, now it's time for the story at large, which is where I'm once again talking about the things that I like, mostly. The narrative starts properly with the leader of the Dunlendings, Freka, arriving to try and convince Helm to have Hera marry his son, Wolf, all while moving like a Zelda CDI character. Helm, being insulted by Freka and not trusting him even a little bit, issues unarmed combat. He then proceeds to accidentally kill the fat bastard with a single punch.
He's dead?
He got the name Hammerhand for a very good reason. Wolf, despite the fact that this was a consensual fight between both parties, and just shit kind of happens in fights sometimes, vows revenge on Helm, and proceeds to become the most incel little fuckboy imaginable just because he was also directly rejected by Hera just a few minutes prior. A few years go by, and he has mustered up the Men of the Hills and some Southrons under his command to make good on his promise. Hera actually got kidnapped by his men after the Memberberry scene from earlier, and Wolf does offer her to not attack Rohan if she marries him. She is about to accept these terms under duress, and he gets pissed at her because she is only accepting under duress, and not because she is actually attracted to the man that is whiny, insecure, and filled with blind hatred. Oh boy! I wonder what kind of people are taking offense to this movie and the kind of person the villain is. Anyway, after escaping thanks to Old Lady Plot Armor, Wolf's armies attack Edoras, with Helm leading the charge against them. He has Hera stay behind, wanting to keep her safe, where she thankfully makes a discovery that one of their allies betrayed them, recognizing their sigil from when she was captured by Wolf. With this knowledge, she is able to get the city evacuated just in time, but the city is still lost, along with both of her brothers and her father being gravely injured. The people of Rohan then make their way to the Hornburg, which will later be known as Helm's Deep, as Wolf lays siege on the fortress through a long and terrible winter. And it's during this winter that the part I was waiting for happens. The legend of Helm Hammerhand truly begins here, as after his body mends and he is possessed by rage and grief, he uses a secret passage out of the Hornburg and uses the cover of wind and snow to chip away at Wolf's men, with only his fists. The part that I actually liked the most in the movie version is that there is a little fake out for those who are unaware of the story, where we never see Helm doing this, just the aftermath and hear others think that he is a wraith. And at some point, Hera accidentally stumbles upon the same secret passageway, where we get a little scene with some orcs looking for rings, which, to note, I am fine with honestly because it makes a reasonable amount of sense in universe, though it is admittedly fan service. But most importantly, they are accompanied by a snow troll that sports a big white beard. So for those who don't know, they think, oh, this must be what people thought was Helm. And they can think that for just long enough before the goat himself jumps down and kills the two orcs before straight up brawling with the troll. The kind of man that every TTRPG monk should aspire to be. Peak character right here. After the troll is taken out, he then has a lovely heart-to-heart with Hera, and it feels like this is the first time he has truly seen her. Like, don't get me wrong, throughout the movie it is shown that he has always loved her and wants the best for her in his own way, but after everything that's happened, he is truly seeing her. I really liked it. It pulled at my heartstrings. But then they escape back to the Hornburg with Wolf on their tails, where Helm gets his daughter inside, but he remains to protect the gate. Man after man on that thin, icy path, he takes them out with only his fists and whatever he chooses to grab from these mooks. While fighting and the storm is raging, Wolf is right there and is called out to his face, but he chickens out like the little coward he is. Although, after all of that, Helm does get frozen to death while standing because it took nature itself to kill the man, and even then, his knees didn't bend. But now, Hera is left in charge, as she is the princess, and she formulates a plan to call for aid using Chekhov's eagle. The last event that I really want to talk about is the final confrontation between Hera and Wolf. Hera wants to distract him to keep his attention away from her people's escape, even puts on an old wedding gown for extra theatrics and mind games. Also, with the gauntlets and the greaves, it's a fantastic look. Plus, it comes with the fun exchange of him asking her who she is pledged to, and she just answers, "Death." I love this woman, but Wolf ends up agreeing to one-on-one combat with Hera because she bruises his fragile little ego, and then he ends up losing with Hera even showing mercy. Though, of course, Wolf revokes their agreement and has his men attack anyway. Old Lady Plot Armor strikes again as she fights off several men while the bridge is set on fire. Really makes you wonder if she's actually a Maiar or something. Anyway, Wolf and Hera go for round 2. And then round 3, as aid actually comes for Rohan in the form of Hera's cousin Freyalof. And at the end, Wolf is taken out by Hera using a shield to crush his goddamn larynx. This being the biggest change from the original source material, where it was Freyalof that killed him. Obviously, for the story that this film is portraying, that had to change, and also obviously, I have no problem with it. Now, I should mention, when I'm talking about Wolf, you may have been thinking that he sounds a bit too much like a stand-in for a modern problem, and I promise you that is only because of the terminology that I used. There is a very long history of people that puff themselves up with money and loyal followers to hide the fact that they are scared and emotionally weak little fellas whose mask constantly slips, and if you call them out on it, they will beat their chest, act all strong or scary, and send their little goons after you. This is a timeless villain, because there will always be people like Wolf. But now we wrap up with Saruman settling in Isengard, which does track with the timeline, and a needless Gandalf name drop as Hera is off on an adventure. Overall, I had a fantastic time with this movie. It is really everything that I want from anime Lord of the Rings. Sure, it's not perfect. I went over most of my main problems, and I'll admit the animation isn't always great, but it is never too egregious in my opinion, and most of the time, it is in fact great. The character designs are immaculate, the colors are breathtaking, and the scene compositions are works of art. There are people saying that this is a soulless movie, only made to extend the license of the IP, and that was certainly a driving factor in deciding to make a Lord of the Rings movie. That is a fact. But this specific story? Really think about it for more than a second. In modern-day Hollywood, making a feature-length anime adaptation of a little-known footnote story from the Lord of the Rings appendices does not sound like a safe choice. If the only reason for this to exist is for keeping the IP and nothing else, I can think of a dozen safer ways to do that. Hunt for Gollum comes to mind. The fact of the matter is that there is care and passion put into this film. Sure, some of it may be misplaced and misused, but I felt like those who worked on The War of the Rohirrim actually respected Tolkien and his work when creating this. And that is not something I can say for the other project that I still won't be naming. In my heart of hearts, I do feel like this expanded version of the story of Helm Hammerhand isn't too far off from what Tolkien himself could have written if he had. That is purely speculative, but from reading many of his books multiple times, it has that feeling for me. There are problems, yes, and it's good to be critical of them, but vomiting out buzzword-filled slop isn't being critical. It's a plain lack of true media literacy, and more than that, it's lazy. Lazier than what they think the movie is. But what are your thoughts on The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim? Let me know down in the comments below. I am very interested to find out. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time in the void. Later.